Wikipedia, the home of easily copy and pastable information for lazy students on a last-minute assignment. If you dig deep enough, however, you'll find that it's also home to numerous disturbing pages and articles that will leave you feeling shocked, disturbed, or even downright uncomfortable, depending on the topic. Let's kick things off with a strange one. We all love a good Jane Doe mystery on this channel, so here's one I've never covered before. The Istal Woman is the name given to an unidentified body found at Isdalen in Bergen, Norway. She was found on November 29th, 1970. She was lying on her back with her clenched hands up by her torso. Isdalen literally translates to Ice Valley, so you can imagine how cold the area was. Still, there was no evidence of any campfire being made nearby. In spite of that, the front of her body and her clothes had been severely burned. Her face was so charred it was unrecognizable, though forensic artists were able to come up with this image showing what she likely looked like in life. Near her remains were a whole host of items, including an empty bottle of St. Halvard, a cheap brand of liquor, 2 plastic water bottles, a plastic passport container, some clothes, an umbrella, a purse, a matchbox, a watch, 2 earrings, and a ring. All the labels on these items that could have helped to identify her had been removed or rubbed off. Most interestingly, however, was that there were traces of burned documents around her body. A few days later, 2 suitcases linked to this unknown woman were found at Bergen Station. Inside them were clothes, again with their tags removed, wigs, cosmetics, medicine, maps and timetables, a notepad, and money in Norwegian, Belgian, British and Swiss currencies. 100 Deutsche marks were also found hidden in the lining of one of the cases. Curious. An autopsy was carried out on her body. It was determined that she died from a combination of phenobarbital and carbon monoxide. She had ingested around 50 to 70 sleeping pills, with more than 12 found scattered around the scene of her passing. What's more, her lungs contained a large amount of soot, which indicated one disturbing fact. She was still alive when she was burned. A large bruise on her neck could have been made after she had a fall, or perhaps after being struck by a blunt object. The last confirmed sighting of this woman alive was when she left her hotel room on November 23rd, 6 days before her remains were discovered. The hotel staff described her as attractive, with brown eyes and dark hair, though she reportedly often wore wigs. That lines up with the content of her suitcases. They said she appeared to be on guard during the entirety of her stay. She apparently smelled strongly of garlic. The woman had stayed in several other Bergen hotels before that one, and in each, she had changed her room multiple times after checking in. In several of the hotels, she had been overheard speaking with unknown people in German, English, and Flemish. After decoding her notepad entries, detectives learned that the Istal Woman was quite the traveller. In the run-up to her mysterious end, she had travelled extensively around not only Norway, but Europe in general. Based on her handwritten check-in forms at the hotel she'd stayed at, they learned that she'd been using at least 8 different passports and aliases. The only consistent detail on all of these forms was that she listed her nationality as Belgian. Given the fact that this all happened at the height of the Cold War, it's been speculated that the Istal Woman was a covert agent of some kind. That would account for her strange movements, which all just so happened to line up with the top secret trials for Penguin missiles. Not to mention, there were numerous other strange disappearances in Norway during those years, which were all later linked to international espionage. Ultimately, it was ruled by the authorities that the woman had simply taken her own life. That raised a lot of suspicions, given the facts of the case, and many people started claiming that the police were being pressured to cover up the real story. In 2005, when the investigation was reopened, a man came forward and said that he may have seen the woman a few days before her body was found. He says she was hiking along the hillside in Isdalen, surprisingly underdressed for such an activity, as if she had planned to be in the city and not in the Ice Valley. She was apparently walking ahead of 2 men dressed in coats. The witness thought about saying something to them, but didn't. He tried to report what he had seen at the local police station, but was told to forget about it. So, who was the Istal Woman? A spy? A member of some professional, perhaps nefarious organization? A lonely woman who'd decided to end it all in the most elaborate way she could think of? The jury's out, I'm afraid. Still, this is an interesting Wikipedia article to read through for all you unsolved mystery lovers out there. It provides a great summary of the case, and is the perfect starting point to get you digging deeper into this case's rabbit hole. Long-time listeners of this channel might remember a case I covered a few years ago. That of Dr. Carl Tansler, a man who turned the woman he was infatuated with into a literal human doll after stealing her body from her final resting place. Well, what was supposed to be her final resting place. In researching this video, I happened to stumble across the Wikipedia page of a man called Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian gentleman with a similar interest in human taxidermy. Moskvin wasn't just some lowlife or social outcast. He was a well-respected professional, a philologist, historian and linguist, living in the 5th largest city in Russia, Nizhny Novgorod, a name I probably just butchered. During his youth, he and his school friends liked to go wandering around the local graveyards. It was at that time that he witnessed the funeral of a girl his own age. He was forced by an adult to kiss the girl on the forehead, which is what experts believe sparked his strange curiosity with the dead, in particular, the young dead. Unlike that girl, Moskvin grew up and graduated from the philological faculty of Moscow State University. His main areas of interest were Celtic history and folklore, particularly the parts that involve rituals and the occult. His colleagues described him as a genius with the ability to speak 13 languages. They also said that he was eccentric, what with him having a massive doll collection in his house. He was also a recluse, choosing to spend most of his time alone or with his parents, and never married or even dated. In spite of these eccentricities, he was widely respected in academic circles. In 2005, he was commissioned to summarize and list the dead in 752 cemeteries across the region, a job he gladly accepted. He traveled between each cemetery on foot, walking up to 30 kilometers a day. As he traveled and gathered his data, he reportedly drank from puddles, slept in haystacks, and even spent the night sleeping in a coffin that was being prepared for an upcoming burial. He relished every moment. Well, Moskvin enjoyed his work, maybe a little too much, but still, everyone needs a hobby, right? Unfortunately, in this case, Moskvin's hobby was much more connected to his work with cemeteries than it should have been. Detectives in Nizhny Novgorod were investigating the desecration of a large amount of graves. Someone had been digging up the recently buried dead and doing who knows what with their remains. On November 2nd, 2011, they finally found who was responsible. Moskvin. They raided his house, and what they found inside was as unexpected as it was disturbing. In various places around his home, they found 26 life-sized, human-like dolls. The reason they appeared so human? They were. They were placed on shelves and sitting on sofas. Under cover of darkness, and over the span of about 10 years, Moskvin had been going to grave sites in the local area, and even as far as Moscow, disinterring the remains of recently deceased youths and driving them back to his home. There, he would do his best to preserve them for as long as he could by turning them into human dolls. This involved drying them in salt and baking soda, and then keeping them in secure and dry places. He stuffed their body cavities with rags in order to keep them from withering and shrinking, and sometimes added wax masks to keep their features human. Inside his home, investigators also found metal nameplates removed from headstones, as well as other items that belonged to at least 150 separate graves. They also found detailed instructions on how to make the dolls, maps of the local cemeteries, and a collection of photos and videos showing open graves. The investigators recorded the inside of his apartment. It's a chilling video, I'll tell you that much. Now, Moskvin lived with his parents, and although they spent much of the year away from the house, they always assumed the giant dolls everywhere were just their son's toys. Little did they realize they were sharing a house with the remains of 26 mummified humans. Unlike Dr. Tansler before him, Moskvin was actually taken to court for his deranged actions. He was very compliant during the whole process, and fully cooperated with the authorities. He admitted to feeling a huge amount of sympathy for the people he'd dug up, and that he believed he could bring them back to life through either scientific means, or through the use of black magic. He said that he regularly scoured the obituary sections of newspapers, hoping to find new subjects to experiment on and attempt to revive. Once he found one that, quote-unquote, spoke to him, he would go to their grave and sleep on it. He did this to determine whether the child inside wanted to return to life. He said he never dug up anyone that expressly told him they didn't want to come back. Once he brought them back to his house, he'd sleep near them in order to keep communicating with them, claiming it was easier to hear them when they weren't underground. He considered them his children, and would sing them songs, watch cartoons with them, and even hold birthday parties for their enjoyment. He was sentenced to coercive medical measures, and was sent to a psychiatric clinic, where he remains to this day. Some of you may already be familiar with Project MKUltra, the US government's foray into mind control. For those of you that aren't, here's the scoop. Project MKUltra, or the CIA Mind Control Program, was the codename given to a series of experiments conducted on unwilling or unwitting US and Canadian citizens between the years of 1953 and 1973. Many of these experiments were illegal, and were designed to try and manipulate people's mental states and brain functions. This involved secretly giving them high doses of mind-altering substances, hypnotizing them, giving them electroshocks, forcing them into sensory deprivation tanks and isolated cells, verbally and physically attacking them, and various other forms of control. The aim of the project was simple: to develop the perfect truth serum and to explore other methods of controlling a subject. Some historians also assert that one of the real goals of the project was to create a Manchurian Candidate type subject, sleeper agents who don't realize that they've been programmed to carry out the government's commands. Because of how sci-fi this all sounds, it's pretty crazy to think this is actually a project the government conducted, let alone conducted on ordinary people without their knowledge or consent. They often targeted, quote-unquote, people who would not fight back. This included prison inmates, mental patients, and ladies of the night. One so-called patient was even forced to take a mind-altering substance for 174 days straight. The CIA were attempting to turn him into a so-called robot agent. They also experimented with wiping the minds of these people. Those who resisted were experimented on even more harshly. As a result of this, some of the victims suffered with incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking the interrogators were their parents. In areas under US control at the time, such as parts of Germany and Japan, the CIA established secret detention centers and conducted further experiments on people they deemed as expendable. These were carried out to try and better understand how to destroy the human mind. Little is known about these centers, or any of the other experiments conducted in North America for that matter. That's because most of MKUltra's files and records were destroyed before the public ever got a chance to read them. The things we know about it now are likely only the tip of the iceberg. Not to mention, we don't really know what findings the CIA were able to make from their highly unethical research project. The full impact of MKUltra experiments, including the deaths which resulted from them, will likely never be known. This Wikipedia page makes for some uncomfortable reading, particularly when you realize just how recently this was all going on, and in the land of the free no less. Due to how controversial MKUltra was when the public caught wind of it, there's no shortage of books, movies, TV shows and songs referencing it. Pineapple Express, the Jason Bourne books and movies, Stranger Things, heck, even that urban myth, Polybius. It's certainly the type of scandal that captures people's attentions and imaginations. Now here's a page that might keep you up at night. Of all of the ways you can die in this world, fatal insomnia has to be up there with the most elongated and arduous of all of them. And the most terrifying part? You could develop it suddenly without any prior warning. If you couldn't guess from the name, fatal insomnia is when a person suddenly loses the ability to fall asleep. Things start off slowly, with the patient's insomnia progressively getting worse and worse. Eventually, the lack of sleep results in the patient experiencing hallucinations, delirium, confusion akin to that of an Alzheimer's patient, and, after months or even years, an inevitable death. The average person lives 18 months after becoming affected. There's no known cure. Sleeping pills prove to not only be ineffective, but actually make the condition even worse. Fatal insomnia is thought to be caused by a mutation of the gene encoding protein, PRPC, and there's no way of knowing if or when this might start affecting you, unless of course you happen to undergo genetic testing. If you should fall victim to this mutation, however, then you'll go through 4 stages of degradation. Stage 1. Over the course of about 4 months, you'll start experiencing increasing insomnia, until, eventually, you find yourself unable to sleep at all. As things get worse, you'll start to experience panic attacks, paranoia, develop new phobias, and a whole host of other fun things that are associated with sleep deprivation. Stage 2. Panic attacks will become more intense, and hallucinations will start to become a part of your every waking moment. This will go on for approximately 5 months. Stage 3. You'll become completely unable to sleep, and will experience rapid weight loss over the course of about 3 months. Stage 4. Dementia. You'll become unresponsive, or perhaps even mute. This typically lasts about 6 months before you finally die. The only thing anyone can do for you during this time is support you. This wiki page certainly makes for some grave bedtime reading. Sweet dreams. You may have seen this face before. The Inconnu de la Seine is the death mask of an unidentified woman supposedly pulled from the River Seine in the late 1880s. Her visage became popular with artists and writers, inspiring numerous literary works and paintings. You may have even seen this face hanging on a wall somewhere, since her mask was, and to some extent still is, a popular decorative fixture, particularly in France and Germany. As the story goes, the pathologist at the Paris morgue was so taken by the young woman's beauty that he made the death mask to preserve her face for eternity. Over the years, many copies of it were made, and it became a fashionable item among the more morbid Parisians. Her mask was viewed as a modern-day Mona Lisa, and people were encapsulated by her eerie smile and what her mask had to say about life and death. Where you're most likely to have seen this face before, however, is on CPR dolls. The face of the first aid mannequin, Resusciane, was actually modelled on the Inconnu de la Seine. As such, it's often joked that this unknown woman has the most kissed face of all time. The Wikipedia page details all the cultural works that revolve around or were inspired by the Inconnu de la Seine. Whoever she was, and however she came to lose her life in that river, there's no way she could have realised just how famous her face would become after she departed from this world. There's a lot of disturbing Wikipedia pages related to Joseph Stalin and his antics, but one of the most interesting orders during his reign as Russia's dictator was the Nino Affair. In Stalin's mind, the Soviet Union was filled with a lot of undesirable people. He couldn't just throw them all in the gulags, however. Another problem Mother Russia had was with its land. It had a huge amount of it that hadn't been brought into production. In 1933, he and his comrades came up with a solution for this. Let's just ship 2 million people off to Siberia, have them set up their own towns, and put those icy wastes to good use. Well, that idea had some merit, thought the Man of Steel, but first they needed to conduct a trial. This experiment was the Nino Affair, the mass deportation of 6,000 people to Nino Island in 1933. The island itself was small, isolated, swampy, lacking in natural resources, and freezing cold. The 6,000 civilians, many from Moscow and Leningrad, didn't have a choice as to whether they went or not. They were forcefully uprooted, shipped off against their will, and ordered to build a special settlement on Nino. This had the added benefit of cleansing the city of unwanted individuals. Among the ordinary people that were sent to the island, there were hundreds of hardened criminals as well. These more antisocial test subjects beat up the weaker ones during their journey to the island, stealing their food and blankets. In total, 27 people died before they even reached their destination. They were dropped off on the island on May 18th and abandoned, with only flour for food, and little in the way of tools, clothing or shelter. 1/3 of these newly arrived settlers were too weak to even stand up. Guards were set up around the perimeter of the island, with orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. Since there was no way to turn their flour into bread on the island, they all simply mixed it with water and ate that for sustenance. As such, dysentery on the island was widespread. Many of the new inhabitants wanted out, so they built makeshift rafts to try get away. Most of these rafts broke in the water, and hundreds of bodies washed up on the island shores in the first few days. Those that did make it to the other side were hunted and executed by the guards as if they were wild game. Society on the island quickly broke down. Gangs formed, and their leaders ended up controlling the island. People were killed over food disputes. Anyone with gold teeth had them ripped from their skulls. The guards started killing settlers for minor offences, or even just for the fun of it. It was a real-life dystopia. 2 weeks after arriving, a lack of food and the newly accepted normalcy of violence led to people eating each other. This cannibalism became extremely common, with people killing a fellow settler for the sole purpose of chowing down on their remains. By the start of June, the experiment was already considered a failure, and the surviving residents of Nazino Island were removed and redistributed to other settlements. Of the roughly 6,000 people that were sent there, around 2,000 perished from exposure, starvation, disease, or at the hands of their fellow settlers. Another 2,000 disappeared completely and were presumed to have perished in the Siberian wastes. Only 200 to 300 of the survivors were capable of working after the fact. They were only on Nazino Island for 2 weeks. Do you get really bad hangovers? Do you wish there was some kind of medicine you could take that would totally get rid of them immediately? Well, maybe you should try a spoonful of Meldified Man. You better start mixing up your batch right now though. It takes 100 years to make it. So I'm a big fan of history, and while doing research for this video, I stumbled upon the Wikipedia page of an old historical medical food that people used to make use of. Meldified Man. There are records of it being prescribed in ancient Greece, Arabia, and at other places and times. It was thought to be a cure-all, the ultimate medicine. The substance was said to help with all kinds of ailments, and people even believed that if you ate it, it could help heal your broken limbs. If you were alive back then, you might be eager to get your hands on some Meldified Man yourself, right? Well, maybe not after you hear what it's actually made of. As the name kind of implies, Meldified Man was made by marinating human remains in honey for a century, so that the body completely liquefied into a substance that could be eaten by future generations. The most disturbing part? The process was started while the person was still alive. Old men reaching the end of their lives would willingly submit themselves to being mummified in honey. The donor would stop eating anything other than honey, and would go as far as to bathe in the sticky stuff every day. Eventually, their excrement, and according to legend, even their sweat, would start to consist of golden honey. After some time, this diet would prove fatal. The old man's body would then be placed into a sarcophagus, which was itself filled with honey, and would be sealed away until the mellification process was complete. After a century had passed, the contents of the tomb would be opened, and inside would be a gooey confection. Winnie the Pooh would have a field day with this one. Because of its rarity and supposed healing properties, the Meldified Man would be sold at market for a hefty price. The use of mummies as medicine was actually a lot more common than you'd think back in the past, and not just the ancient past either, but even in the Middle Ages, and all the way up into the 18th century. There's even a source that claims Alexander the Great was turned into a Meldified Man. The Wikipedia page also contains notes on other medical practices from the past, like how Romans would drink the blood of gladiators, thinking it would cure their epilepsy. delectable. Anyway, as appealing as honey-saturated human goo sounds, I think I'll stick with aspirin. Shokushinbutsu, the act of self-mummification. This has been practiced by Buddhist monks throughout history and in various parts of the world, like China, Thailand, and India, and to successfully self-mummify in this manner was viewed as achieving the ultimate state of enlightenment. The practice was most common in Japan, specifically in the northern mountains of Yamagata between the 11th and 19th century. The practice was banned in 1879 by Emperor Meiji. Though many hundreds, if not thousands of monks during those years attempted to become Shokushinbutsu, only 24 of these mummies have ever been discovered, which goes to show just how much willpower it took to complete this process. This Wikipedia page even has some photos of these morbid monks, once human, now, through sheer determination, fleshy statues, preserved for hundreds of years. Here's how they did it. Once a senior monk decided he wanted to achieve Buddha nature in his body, he would inform his brothers of his intentions. They would then assist him with his transformation. The monk would begin a strict diet called Mokujikigyo, which literally translates into eating a tree. The diet consisted of pine needles, resins, and seeds found in the mountains. Delicious. Over time, his calorie intake was limited. This diet removed all fat from the monk's body. Increased periods of fasting and meditation would help the monk reach his goal of starvation. His liquid intake would also progressively get smaller, slowly dehydrating the monk and making his organs shrink and his skin cling tightly to what little muscle he had left. When it appeared as if starvation would soon take hold of him, the senior monk would begin his unbelievably long final session of meditation. He would die in this so-called jhana, chanting the Nembutsu mantra to himself until his heart finally stopped. The whole Shokushinbutsu process was completed over the course of about 3,000 days or 10 years. And here I am, barely able to focus on anything longer than 5 minutes. If everything went according to plan, and the monk didn't drop out at any point over those years, his body would have naturally preserved itself as a mummy, with skin and teeth intact, without the need of any artificial preservatives. Some of the mummies that have been found are 300, 400, even 500 years old. There are several of them on display at temples across Asia, and they're all revered by followers of Buddhism as the literal embodiment of their doctrine. Jeannie is the pseudonym of an American feral child, whose real identity is protected by the state. Her childhood was non-existent due to the cruelty of her father. Rather than care for Jeannie, he instead kept her inside a dark, locked room, either strapped to a toilet or bound within a crib with her arms and legs immobilized. She stayed in that room for her whole childhood. She was allowed no visitors, no stimulation of any kind, and was given the bare minimum amount of food and water to survive. If she made any noise, her father would beat her with a plank of wood which he kept in her room. He didn't speak to her using words, only growled at her like a dog, and even grew his fingernails out so that he could scratch her like one too. She lived like this until she was 13 and a half, at which point she was finally saved in November of 1970. Due to being kept so underdeveloped, her rescuers thought that she was only 6 or 7. Her father took his own life rather than face the consequences of his actions. Due to being so isolated and rarely ever hearing a human voice or seeing a human face, Jeannie was of course unable to speak or even non-verbally communicate. She had also developed many medical conditions. Her motor skills were extremely weak. Her eyes couldn't focus on anything further away than the dimensions of the room she had been kept in, and her cognitive abilities were like that of a toddler. She had an extreme phobia of dogs, which likely resulted from her father acting as one. She would easily become frustrated and angry, at which point she would start attacking herself. She obviously had no social skills whatsoever. Due to being a rare example of a feral child, Jeannie was viewed as an opportunity to study how humans acquire language and how they learn to socialize. As such, there's a huge amount of information about her, detailing her development from the day she was saved. Fortunately, her condition improved leaps and bounds, though she obviously never fully recovered from her ordeal. By 1972, she had acquired enough language to understand and form simple sentences. She was overheard muttering to herself, "Father hit big stick. Father is angry." This was the first sign that she could talk about her past life. Sadly, her verbal communication never really improved further than simple, short sentences, though in contrast, her non-verbal communication did become excellent. This allowed her to express her thoughts that she couldn't verbalize. Over time, interest in Jeannie's case began to dwindle, and funding for research into her came to an end. Between 1978 and the early 1990s, Jeannie moved through at least 4 foster homes, some of which treated her extremely badly. She became withdrawn and uncommunicative once again. By 1993, things seemed to have improved once again after she was moved to a better, more accommodating facility. As of right now, Jeannie remains a ward of the state of California, living in an undisclosed location in LA. A private investigator was hired to track her down and reported that she appeared happy and healthy, now in her early 60s. She apparently still only speaks a few words, but communicates very well in sign language. This is actually a particularly long Wikipedia article to read through, since she was the subject of so much scientific analysis, so I haven't been able to cover everything in Jeannie's story here. But if it resonated with you, I recommend checking it out now. Well, after the end credits at least. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. A huge thank you to Robin Mickelson for making the thumbnail for this video. He helps me out a lot, and he's a real talent, so make sure to check him out by the links in the description below. Also, a massive thank you to all of my supporters on YouTube and on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Mark Furnish, Leonardo Martinez, Hungry and Hammered, Aura Dragon 1, Ricky Cohen Jr., TheOnlyDorita, Lord 210, Azrael Warakai, Silas Gheist, Alba Medrano, Infamous-senpapi, Sieg, Carla, Decaying Girl, Connor Louthan, Kelly Rocco, Nadine, Kelly Rocco again, Sloane Crawford, Sarah Ramirez, AnimeWimp, Martin Vatland, Gina Valera, Procupidine Netta, Philip Westra, Alex Greensall, Tom King, Monica Mendoza, Crawford K McDonald, Hamish Kay, Phantom Knight, and Alicia L. Thank you all so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. That wraps things up, guys. Be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you. And until next time, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.